The crystalline spires of New Alexandria's Interspecies Diplomatic Center caught the morning sunlight, casting rainbow refractions across the gathered crowd. Caxthor adjusted his ceremonial armor, the iridescent scales reflecting his species' traditional colors of pride and strength. As a young Zenthuri warrior, he stood nearly 9 feet tall, his muscular frame dwarfing most of the other diplomatic delegates, especially the humans. The humans. Caxthor's upper lip curled slightly, revealing the edge of his sharp teeth. Their presence here had been a source of constant irritation since their arrival 3 standard cycles ago. How had such small, soft creatures managed to earn a seat at the Galactic Council? The stories about their capabilities had to be exaggerated, propaganda spread by human sympathizers. Ambassador Chen approaches, announced the protocol droid, its metallic voice echoing through the chamber. Caxthor's attention snapped to the entrance, where a human female of average height stepped through the doorway. Behind her walked a smaller human female in a black uniform, her security officer, Sarah Chen, no relation to the ambassador. Caxthor had been watching Sarah Chen for days now. While the ambassador engaged in diplomatic pleasantries, the security officer's eyes constantly scanned the room, her posture relaxed but ready. She moved with an efficiency that seemed almost predatory, despite her species' obvious physical limitations. "The Zenthuri delegation honors your presence, Ambassador," rumbled First Speaker Quax, their senior diplomat. The formal greetings began, a dance of words and gestures that Caxthor found increasingly tedious. His role as honor guard required him to stand still, but his mind wandered to the training halls where he'd rather be. The meeting proceeded as usual until a minor disagreement arose regarding trading rights in the Proxima sector. Ambassador Chen's voice remained level as she presented human claims to certain resource-rich asteroids. First Speaker Kavax's scales shifted to a deeper purple, a sign of growing frustration. "Perhaps," the human ambassador suggested, "we could arrange a joint mining operation. Our extraction techniques are quite efficient." Kavax's scales darkened further. "Are you suggesting that human methods surpass our own?" "Not at all," Ambassador Chen replied smoothly. "Merely that collaboration might benefit both our species." Something in her tone struck Caxthor as condescending. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. "Your species speaks much of capabilities, yet we see little proof." The chamber fell silent. Sarah Chen's hand didn't move to her weapon, but her attention fixed on Caxthor with an intensity that made his scales ripple. "Guard Caxthor," First Speaker Kavax warned, "you forget your place." "No." Ambassador Chen raised her hand. "Let him speak. What proof would satisfy you, young warrior?" Caxthor's pride swelled at being addressed directly. "Humans claim to be equals, yet you are half our size, with a third our strength. You have no natural weapons, no scales for protection. Your only advantage seems to be in making bold claims." Sarah Chen took a single step forward. "Would you care to test those claims?" The security officer's quiet question carried clearly across the chamber. Caxthor's secondary heart quickened its pace. This was his chance to prove what many Zenthuri whispered in private, that humans were unnecessarily elevated to their current diplomatic status. "I challenge you to combat," Caxthor declared, "under the ancient rites of proof by demonstration." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. First Speaker Kavax's scales shifted to alarm white. "This is highly irregular." "I accept," Sarah Chen interrupted, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence, "under standard exhibition rules." "No." Caxthor's mandibles clicked in excitement. "Full combat rules. First to yield or become incapacitated." Ambassador Chen turned to her security officer. "Sarah, this isn't necessary." "With respect, Ambassador, I believe it is." Sarah's eyes hadn't left Caxthor. "The challenge has been issued formally. Refusing would only reinforce certain misconceptions." First Speaker Kavax stepped forward. "As this challenge invokes ancient rights, I must allow it. But know that the Zenthuri delegation bears no responsibility for what follows. The combat will take place in 3 standard hours in the exhibition arena. Medical teams from both species will be present. As the chamber erupted in discussion, Caxthor felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, he would demonstrate the natural superiority of his species. He had trained in combat since emergence, his strength and speed honed through countless matches. This human female would learn the price of her species' arrogance. But as the delegates filed out, Sarah Chen's unwavering gaze caught his attention once more. There was something in those alien eyes that gave him pause. Not fear, not anger, but a calculating patience that reminded him of the apex predators from his homeworld. For the first time since issuing his challenge, Caxthor wondered if perhaps he had made a terrible mistake. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Caxthor's ceremonial armor was exchanged for combat gear, his weapons checked and approved by the combat officials. Reports of betting pools circulated, heavily favored toward the Zenthari warrior, of course. Yet a surprising number of other species were placing credits on the human. In his preparation chamber, an elder warrior named Vexkar approached him. "You should withdraw the challenge," the veteran advised. "And shame our species." Caxthor scoffed. "I will prove what we all know to be true." "You know nothing." Vexkar's scales shifted to the deep blue of sorrow. "I fought alongside humans in the Nexus campaign. Their strength is not in their bodies, young one. It is in here." He tapped his armored head. "Then victory will be even sweeter," Caxthor replied, checking his armor one final time. "When I defeat both their body and mind." Vexkar simply shook his head and departed, leaving Caxthor alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that perhaps he had underestimated the complexity of what he had set in motion. But it was too late for doubt now. In less than an hour, he would face the human in combat, and all would see the truth of their species' relative worth. What Caxthor didn't realize was that this truth might not be the one he expected to prove. The exhibition arena's preparation chambers were designed to accommodate warriors from dozens of species, but Caxthor found the space confining. He paced the length of the room, his claws clicking against the metallic floor. The sound echoed off the walls, matching the rapid beating of his heart. Through the chamber's viewing screen, he could see the arena itself, a circular expanse of synthetic terrain designed to provide neutral ground for any combatant. The environmental controls would maintain conditions acceptable to both species, though Caxthor suspected this favored the human. Zenthari evolved in higher gravity and denser atmosphere than Earth standard. A soft chime announced the arrival of first speaker Kvax. The elder diplomat's scales had settled into a muted gray of resignation. "The human delegation has requested a final attempt at diplomatic resolution," he announced. "They wish to withdraw." Caxthor's scales flushed with triumph. "No." Kvax's voice carried a weight Caxthor had never heard before. "They wish to protect you from yourself." "Protect me." Caxthor barked a laugh. "I am twice her size, with 3 times her strength. My scales can deflect primitive projectile weapons. What protection could I possibly need?" Kvax activated a small holoprojector. Images flickered to life. Battlefield recordings from various conflicts. Humans, despite grievous injuries, continuing to fight. Humans using improvised weapons to overcome physically superior opponents. Humans adapting tactics mid-battle to exploit previously unknown weaknesses. "This is why they earned their place on the council," Kvax explained. "Not through strength alone, but through their capacity to overcome seemingly impossible odds. They call it adaptive pressure response. We call it terrifying." Caxthor watched a recording of a human soldier, badly wounded, successfully defending a position against 3 Drachnid raiders. The humans' movements were precise, economical, lethal. "These are their warriors," he argued. "Security Officer Chen is a mere diplomatic guard." "There is no such thing as a mere human warrior," came a new voice. Vexkar had returned, accompanied by several other veteran warriors. Their scales all showed variations of concern. I once saw a human diplomatic attaché disable 3 assassins using nothing but a writing implement. You all fear them so much. Caxthor's scales flushed with shame and anger. Have we become so weak? Fear is wisdom when it makes you stronger, Vexkar countered. The humans understand this better than most. It's why they're so dangerous. They know their weaknesses intimately and turn them into strengths. In the human preparation chamber, Sarah Chen went through her own preparations with methodical precision. She had stripped down to basic athletic wear, foregoing any armor. Her movements as she warmed up were fluid, practiced, the result of countless hours of training. You don't have to do this, Ambassador Chen said from the doorway. The diplomatic damage is already done, whether you fight or not. Sarah continued her stretching routine. With respect, Ambassador, that's exactly why I have to do this. Their warrior caste needs to understand that strength isn't everything. Better they learn it in a controlled environment than in a real crisis. The ambassador sighed. The medical team is prepped. They won't be needed, Sarah replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. She began wrapping her hands with protective tape, each movement precise and purposeful. But yes, they're ready. Dr. Santos has experience with Zenthari physiology. You've studied their combat techniques. Sarah nodded. Every recorded match for the past 5 years. Their honor guard uses a modified version of their traditional martial arts. Lots of power moves, designed to overwhelm with superior strength and speed. They've never had to adapt it for weaker opponents because they've never needed to. Until now, the ambassador observed. Until now, Sarah agreed, finishing her warm-up. She rolled her shoulders, loosening muscles that had been tension-tight since the challenge. It's not about winning, Ambassador. It's about teaching. And if the lesson costs you your life. Sarah's smile was slight but genuine. Then it's still worth teaching. But it won't come to that. The Zenthari respect strength. They just need to learn to recognize it in all its forms. Back in his chamber, Caxthor watched as technicians performed final checks on his combat gear. The warnings from his elders had shaken him more than he cared to admit, but it was far too late for doubt. The arena was filling with spectators, representatives from dozens of species coming to witness this unprecedented match. The environmental systems hummed to life, adjusting the arena's conditions to a compromise between Earth and Zenthari norms. The synthetic terrain shifted, creating a variety of levels and obstacles, some high enough to give Caxthor's superior height an advantage, others low enough to provide cover for someone of human stature. A final chime sounded through both preparation chambers. 1 minute until the match would begin. Caxthor rolled his shoulders, feeling his scales flex and shift beneath his light combat armor. Whatever tricks the human might employ, whatever hidden strengths she might possess, he was still a Zenthari warrior. His species had evolved as apex predators, warriors without equal in physical combat. But as he stepped toward the arena entrance, Vexkar's words echoed in his mind. Fear is wisdom when it makes you stronger. For the first time, Caxthor wondered if perhaps his lack of fear might prove to be his greatest weakness. The entrance portal dilated open. Harsh artificial light flooded in. It was time to prove himself, or learn a lesson his species had somehow failed to learn until now. Either way, the next few minutes would change everything. The arena fell silent as both combatants emerged from their chambers. Under the harsh artificial lighting, Caxthor's scales gleamed like polished armor, while Sarah Chen's simple athletic wear seemed almost inappropriately casual. The size difference between them was striking. The Zenthari warrior towered over the human, his massive frame casting a shadow that nearly engulfed her. The combat official, a neutrally programmed AI, materialized as a hologram between them. Combat parameters confirmed. Victory conditions, submission or incapacitation. Lethal force is permitted but discouraged. Medical intervention available upon request. Combatants, acknowledge. Acknowledged, they spoke in unison. Begin combat in 3, 2, 1. Engage. Thor launched forward with explosive speed, his massive form covering the distance between them in a single bound. His initial strike, aimed at ending the fight quickly, hit nothing but air as Sarah smoothly sidestepped, her movement so efficient it seemed almost lazy. "First lesson," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Mass times velocity equals predictability." The Xanthari warrior spun, his tail whipping around in a secondary attack that should have caught her off guard. Instead, she ducked under it and stepped inside his guard, delivering 2 rapid strikes to points just below his armored scales. Pain flared in nerves he didn't know could be targeted so precisely. Thor retreated a step, reassessing. The human hadn't moved from her original position more than 2 meters in any direction. Every motion she made was minimal, calculated, while he had already covered nearly a quarter of the arena's space. Second lesson. Sarah continued, her breathing still perfectly controlled. Economy of motion. Anger flared in Thor's hearts. He launched a combination of strikes that would have overwhelmed any Xanthari opponent. Claws, tail, and armored forearms moving in perfect coordination. Sarah moved through his assault like water through rocks, each dodge requiring seemingly less effort than the last. When she struck back, her blows found nerve clusters and pressure points that his armor should have protected. In the observation gallery, first speaker Kovacs's scales had shifted to the deep blue of revelation. "She's not fighting him," he observed. "She's teaching him." "Typically human," replied Ambassador Chen. "They rarely waste an opportunity to educate." Back in the arena, Thor's frustration mounted as each passing minute revealed more gaps in his combat approach. His superior strength meant nothing if he couldn't land a solid hit. His natural armor provided no advantage against an opponent who struck at the seams and joints. His reach became a liability when Sarah moved too close for his longer limbs to effectively respond. "Third lesson," Sarah said, blocking a strike and using his own momentum to unbalance him. "Adaptation is survival." The human's words carried no mockery, no pride, just the same steady certainty she'd shown since accepting his challenge. Thor found this somehow more infuriating than any taunt. He launched into his species' most devastating combat form, a whirlwind of strikes designed to overwhelm any defense through sheer power and speed. Sarah finally moved more than a few steps, but her retreat was tactical, leading him toward one of the arena's obstacles. As he committed to a powerful forward strike, she used his momentum against him once more. His own strength drove him into the unyielding barrier, costly seconds lost as he recovered his balance. "Fourth lesson," she said, still maddeningly calm. "Strength is not just about power." The fight had lasted barely 5 minutes, but Thor's hearts were racing, his breathing labored. The human showed no signs of fatigue. She hadn't even taken a defensive stance, maintaining the same relaxed but ready posture she'd started with. In desperation, Thor attempted to grapple her, thinking his superior mass would finally prove decisive. It was a mistake. Sarah moved into his charge instead of away from it, her smaller size suddenly an advantage as she used his own mass and momentum to send him flying. He crashed hard, his armor absorbing most of the impact but leaving him momentarily stunned. Before he could rise, Sarah was there, applying pressure to specific points that sent waves of paralyzing pain through his nervous system. He tried to resist, to power through it, but each movement only intensified the effect. "Final lesson," Sarah said, maintaining the hold with precise pressure. "Victory often requires knowing when to yield." Pride warred with wisdom in Thor's mind. He could feel his consciousness starting to fade as the pressure points continued their work. With the last of his strength, he managed to gasp out, "I yield." The pressure released instantly. Sarah stepped back, offered a formal bow, then extended her hand to help him up. The gesture was so unexpected, so at odds with his understanding of combat, that Thor found himself accepting it before his pride could object. As he regained his feet, the arena erupted in a chaos of voices. Species that had evolved as predators and prey, as warriors and peacekeepers, all trying to process what they had witnessed. A Xanthari warrior, one of the galaxy's most formidable close combat specialists, had been systematically dismantled by an opponent half his size. But it was the way she had done it that truly shocked them. Not with overwhelming force or superior technology, but with precision, efficiency, and perhaps most surprisingly, with respect. Each moment had been a lesson, each move a demonstration of principles that transcended species and size. As medical teams approached to check both combatants, Sarah looked up at Caxthor. "You fought well," she said simply. "I fought foolishly," he replied, his scales shifting to show his shame. "No," she corrected him. "You fought as you were taught. Now you've been taught something new. That's not foolishness. That's growth." The impact of her words hit him harder than any physical blow had. As the medical teams led them away, Caxthor realized that he had indeed learned something invaluable, though it was nothing like the lesson he had expected to teach. The medical bay's soft blue lighting cast gentle shadows across Caxthor's scales as the regeneration field hummed around him. Despite the advanced healing technology, his body ached in ways he had never experienced before. The human's precise strikes had affected nerve clusters he hadn't known existed in his own anatomy. "Remarkable precision," the Xanthari medical officer commented, reviewing the combat footage for the third time. "She targeted neural pathways that even our advanced combat training overlooks. The knowledge required to execute such strikes against our physiology." "How long has she been studying us?" Caxthor asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "That's the fascinating part," a new voice answered. Sarah Chen walked into the medical bay, moving with the same fluid grace she had shown in combat. "I learned your neural architecture about 20 minutes before the match, while reviewing your medical files." Caxthor's scales shifted in disbelief. "Impossible." "Human pattern recognition," she explained, taking a seat near his regeneration field. "We evolved as pursuit predators. Understanding prey anatomy quickly was essential for survival. Modern humans just adapted that capability for more sophisticated purposes." The medical officer's scales flickered with interest. "You learned our entire neural structure in 20 minutes. "The basic pathways," Sarah corrected. "Enough to understand vulnerabilities. The rest was extrapolation based on observation during combat. Your scales shift slightly when pain signals travel through major nerve clusters. It creates a map, if you know how to read it." Caxthor found himself experiencing an entirely new sensation, intellectual vertigo. The implications of what she was saying, that humans could analyze and adapt to new information this quickly, in the middle of combat, were staggering. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because understanding builds respect," Sarah replied. "And respect builds better relationships than fear or dominance ever could." The medical officer quietly excused himself, leaving them alone. For several minutes they sat in silence, the regeneration field's hum the only sound. "Your kind," Caxthor finally spoke, "you are not what we thought you were." "Few things ever are," Sarah said. "That's why observation is so important. Why questioning our assumptions can teach us more than confirming them ever could. Like assuming superior strength guarantees victory." Sarah smiled slightly. "Like assuming any single advantage guarantees anything. Strength, speed, size, they're all just tools. It's how we use them, how we adapt them, that matters." "The veterans tried to warn me," Caxthor admitted. "Vexkar spoke of fighting alongside humans. I thought he was exaggerating." "He wasn't," Sarah confirmed. "The Nexus campaign taught both our species a lot about each other. The Xanthari learned that humans could be formidable allies. We learned that sometimes the strongest warriors aren't the ones who can hit the hardest." Caxthor's scales shifted to show his curiosity. "What do you mean?" "Your people's honor guard," Sarah explained. "They're not chosen just for their combat prowess, are they? They're chosen for their ability to read situations, to prevent conflicts before they start. That requires a different kind of strength. The revelation struck Caxthor like a physical blow. She was right. The honor guard's primary duty wasn't combat. It was protection through prevention. He had been so focused on proving physical superiority that he had forgotten the most fundamental aspect of his own role. "I have dishonored my position," he realized aloud. "No," Sarah corrected him firmly. "You've grown into it. The mark of a true warrior isn't never making mistakes. It's learning from them." The regeneration field dimmed, indicating the end of its cycle. As Caxthor sat up, he found that most of the physical pain had faded. What remained was something else, a deep, transformative ache in his understanding of strength, of combat, of his own species' place in the galaxy. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now?" Sarah stood, offering him that same respectful gesture she had in the arena. "Now we both go back to our duties, hopefully with a better understanding of each other. The diplomatic corps could use more honor guards who understand the value of learning from other species. And if others challenge you, there will be those who think they can succeed where I failed." Sarah's smile turned slightly predatory. "Then they'll learn the same lessons you did. Humans are always happy to teach." As Caxthor rose from the medical bed, he found himself returning her smile. "Perhaps," he suggested, "we could arrange some joint training sessions. For the benefit of both our species, of course." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "Though next time, maybe we start with theoretical discussions before moving to practical demonstrations." For the first time since their encounter began, Caxthor laughed. The sound echoed through the medical bay, a genuine expression of joy and understanding that transcended species differences. The medical officer, returning to check on his patient, found the Zenthari warrior and human security officer deep in discussion about combat techniques, neural pathways, and the various ways different species had evolved to survive. Their conversation was punctuated by demonstrations of movement, explanations of biological advantages and disadvantages, and a growing mutual respect that seemed to fill the room. It was, the medical officer realized, exactly the kind of exchange the Galactic Council had been created to foster. Sometimes it just took a little combat to get there. 3 months after the combat that had changed his perspective forever, Caxthor stood at his usual post in the diplomatic center. His scales, once maintained at a constant aggressive sheen, now shifted through more subtle patterns. He watched the flow of delegates with new eyes, seeing not just potential threats but opportunities for understanding. The changes went far beyond his personal growth. Word of the match had spread throughout the galactic diplomatic community, but not in the way he had initially feared. Rather than becoming a tale of Zenthari humiliation, it had evolved into a story of transformation and mutual respect. "Delegate approaching," announced the protocol droid. "Raxian ambassador, first-time visitor." Caxthor noticed the Raxian's nervous glances at his imposing form. Once, he might have taken pride in that fear. Now he shifted his scales to a calming pattern and adjusted his posture to appear less threatening. The ambassador's 6 eyes blinked in surprise, then appreciation. "The Zenthari delegation welcomes you," Caxthor said, using the diplomatic phrases Sarah had helped him practice. "Please, allow me to escort you to the chamber." As they walked, he observed the Raxian's movement patterns, noting the species' unique locomotion. Already, his mind was cataloging potential strengths and vulnerabilities, not for combat, but for understanding. This new habit had made him a more effective guard, not despite his combat experience with Sarah, but because of it. "Is it true?" the Raxian asked suddenly. "The stories about you and the human." "That depends on which stories you've heard," Caxthor replied diplomatically. "But if you're asking about the combat demonstration, yes, I learned valuable lessons that day." "They say you train with them now." Caxthor nodded. The joint training sessions had become legendary in their own right. Twice a week, honor guards from both species met to exchange techniques and knowledge. The results had been revolutionary. "The humans have a saying," he told the Raxian. "The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire." Our understanding of combat, of strength itself, has been transformed by working together. The diplomatic chamber doors opened to reveal a scene that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. Human and Zenthari delegates sat intermixed, their discussion animated but respectful. In one corner, Sarah Chen demonstrated a control technique to a young Zenthari guard, her movements precise and educational. Guard Kaxthor, first speaker Kovacs called out, "Please join us. We were just discussing the proposed Joint Defense Initiative." The initiative had been Ambassador Chen's idea, a program to combine human adaptability with Zenthari strength in a new type of peacekeeping force. The proposal had initially met with skepticism from both sides, until Kaxthor and Sarah had demonstrated its potential. "The galaxy is changing," Ambassador Chen was saying as Kaxthor took his position. "Traditional power structures are evolving. We need peacekeepers who understand that strength comes in many forms. And who better to demonstrate this than those who have learned it firsthand?" Kovacs added, his scales showing pride, not the brittle pride of superiority, but the deeper pride of progress. Sarah caught Kaxthor's eye from across the room and gave him a subtle nod. They had come far from that day in the arena. What had begun as a challenge born of prejudice had evolved into something far more significant, a blueprint for genuine cooperation between species. After the session, Kaxthor found Sarah in the training hall, working with more young guards. "They're learning quickly," he observed. "They have a good example to follow," she replied. "Your willingness to learn, to change, showed them it was possible." "I had an excellent teacher." "You had the courage to learn," she corrected. "That's rarer than you might think." They watched the training for a moment, seeing human and Zenthari guards moving in sync, each adapting their natural abilities to complement the other's strengths. "Did you know?" Kaxthor asked suddenly. "That day in the arena, did you know it would lead to this?" Sarah smiled. "I knew it could. Humans have a long history of turning combat into cooperation. Sometimes, the best way to understand each other is to first understand how we fight." "And now we understand how to fight together," she said, "which means we better understand how to live together." The training hall filled with the sound of shared effort, shared learning, shared growth. Young warriors of both species moved through their exercises, each learning from the other, each becoming stronger not through dominance, but through cooperation. Outside, the crystalline spires of New Alexandria caught the setting sun, casting rainbow refractions across the city. But unlike that fateful morning 3 months ago, these colors didn't reflect pride and strength alone. They reflected something far more powerful, the light of understanding, transformed through the prism of shared experience. Kaxthor's scales shifted to a pattern of deep satisfaction. He had sought to prove superiority and found something far more valuable, the strength that comes from acknowledging our limitations and learning from others. In the end, his greatest victory hadn't been in combat, but in the wisdom to see beyond it. And somewhere in the vast tapestry of space, other species watched and learned, understanding that perhaps humans weren't just another race to be measured by their physical capabilities. They were teachers, adapters, bridge builders. Through them, the galaxy was learning new definitions of strength, of victory, of progress itself. The price of pride had been high, but the rewards of humility had proven immeasurable.